Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist in the magical mystery tour called life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is author Joseph A. Rose. Joseph lives in New York City, and after a lifelong career in the healthcare field, Joseph is now engaged in researching, writing, and publishing works on a variety of historical topics. 11 years ago, Joseph published his book, Grant Under Fire, an expose of generalship and character in the American Civil War, a bold and iconoclastic examination of Ulysses S. Grant's generalship and conduct during the Civil War that challenged many established views historians have promulgated about Grant. Tonight, we will discuss Joseph's controversial work and his writing career. Joseph, welcome to the show. It's a great honor and privilege to have you here. I'd like to start off by asking you, what led you to write about General Grant?
Well, Matthew, I've always loved geography and history, especially military. And during my first year-long cross-country trip, I visited several battlefields of the American Civil War, about which I'd read for decades. And after returning to New York and doing more research, I went online to find that many individuals refused to accept well-documented criticisms of General Grant.
Okay. Now, while you were researching this book, did you go into it already feeling skeptical about Grant's generalship? Or after examining the documentary evidence, you gradually came to your conclusions? What was your mindset when you commenced this project, Joseph?
Well, it sort of built up over time. Beforehand, I was quite neutral as to the commanders on both sides of the conflict. But online, almost every criticism that I broached was met with a pro-Grant knee-jerk rejection. I'd walk over to Barnes & Noble or the New York Public Library, both close by, thank goodness, and do more research, further confirming my views. And this went on for years, and I slowly built up a database of events that are misdescribed in the history books, especially about Grant, but also about Sherman and many of the others in the Civil War, and both pro and con.
Okay. Now, Joseph, while researching this book, what was the greatest surprise you discovered during your research?
Unfortunately, the professional historians could so readily distort and even lie about the historical record, or they were gullible enough to accept easily disprovable accounts of the famous General Grant. Almost every Grant biography is rife with errors and mischaracterizations. For one, the esteemed Professor Emeritus John Marslick has just published a second of his complete annotated editions of Grant's and Sherman's memoirs, in which he promised the reader that if Grant made a factual mistake, the editors would correct it. Instead, they hardly corrected any of the many untruths in those two volumes.
Okay.
That both Grant and Sherman lied to the end of their days about being surprised at the Battle of Shiloh goes unmentioned. Both Grant and Sherman lied about the battle plan for Chattanooga, and Dr. Marslick even stated so in his 1993 biography of Sherman. But neither of these complete annotated versions contain a similar correction. Dr. Marslick agreed in an old article responding to noted historian Albert Castell, who had specified how Sherman made a number of factual mistakes in his memoirs. Marslick somehow omitted these errors in the annotated version. I mean, he agreed once, he knew about them, but then left them out.
Okay. Now, does your book deal solely with Grant during the Civil War, or do you discuss his presidency as well?
I do. Grant Under Fire devotes about 30 pages to the general's post-war career. As he was as a general, he didn't really change much as president. He was lazy, and he allowed his friends and protégés to pretty much do what they wanted. And this led to one of the most corrupt administrations in United States history. And he and Julia, his wife, were even engaged in the crooked gold corner of 1869 with his brother-in-law, Abel Corbin.
Okay. Now, in your book, you discuss that General Grant basically engaged in anti-Semitism. You said, I think if I recall correctly, it was one of their most egregious acts of anti-Semitism on U.S. soil. Okay, what exactly did he do, Mr. Rose? What did he do?
Well, I call it the most egregious official anti-Semitic act on United States soil, because of course there have been even worse things done to the Jewish population that has been done unofficially.
Yes.
But as a general and commanding a department out west, he ordered the expulsion of all Jews, men, women, and children, is from northern Mississippi and the western portions of Tennessee and Kentucky. And he did it because he thought that Jewish traders were trading in cotton, I guess more so than the non-Jewish counterparts, but ordered all Jews out of his department. He made some amends in his actions as president when it came to the pogroms in Romania. He appointed Benjamin Pashotto, I think his name was. He was good in some other ways. But this really was probably the worst official act in the United States.
Okay. What month and year did this take place? This expulsion of Jews, northern Mississippi, and his department. When did that happen, sir?
I think it was December 22nd. Might have been the 20th, but I think the 22nd of 1862. He was engaged in this move south through Mississippi at the time. His father appeared in camp. His father had made a deal with 3 Jewish brothers of a textile firm from Cincinnati, and they said, well, you'll get 1/4 of all the profits from the cotton that you can get by getting the available cotton in Grant's department by using Grant's permission. But Grant supposedly just said no and threw them all out and then decided to expel all the Jews in his department. It's not exactly known, why and what happened or, how it happened, but the end result was the expulsion of Jews for no reason, for many of the Jews for no reason whatsoever. They weren't traders. They were children. They were women. They were up north, or further north, not even close to where this was happening.
Okay. Now, your book also states that Grant mistreated African American soldiers and civilians. Can you elaborate on that, sir? In what way? When, how, in what way?
Well, he had many, many dealings with the black population, also the Indian population, which is a whole other story. Some good, but a lot bad. Some that people don't know about. His great love for his wife, Julia, and he really did love his wife and family, really initiated his involvement with chattel slavery. And although Grant's father was an ardent abolitionist, he married into this slave-owning family and, in time, became a slave owner himself while living on the Dent plantation. Now, post-war accounts, unsurprisingly, stated that he was a good slaveholder. So, of all the slaveholders you hear, which was also bad, well, Grant was one of the good ones. He freed the one slave that he personally owned, but why he did so is unknown. People like to put the best face on that they can, but it's really unknown what happened. Grant, however, he was still not opposed to slavery as late as 1862 when he was a major general in the war. He stated, I never was an abolitionist, not even anti-slavery, which seems pretty late for somebody at that point. And he supported the Union effort to recruit black troops, but then he kept them out of combat even when his white troops were exhausted, most famously during the Overland Campaign. He discriminated against blacks in other ways. He segregated units. He didn't permit black officers, even post-war with the Buffalo Soldiers. When he became president, he did push for civil rights along with the rest of the Republican Party until the end of his 2 administrations, and then he sort of backtracked a little bit.
Okay.
But he was on the right side as president, that's for sure.
Okay. Now, I don't laugh. I read Ron Chernow's biography of Grant, and I know, with the points you made in your book, I noticed that Ron Chernow discussed some of the same issues that you bring up in Grant Under Fire. However, Chernow basically tries to refute your claims. Would you say his bio was an attempt at directly refuting your personal examination of Grant? I mean, do you get that impression? Have you ever read Chernow's book on Grant?
Oh, yeah. I've gone through Chernow many, many times. Should have sent him a copy because my book came out first, and it might have done him a great deal of good. I think what he did is that he followed Mark Twain's suggestion that Grant should have admitted his drinking problem in the memoirs and then showed how he conquered it. And since Grant didn't do that, Chernow has done it for him. So Chernow spends a lot of time focusing in on all of the different episodes of insobriety, of which are quite many. And many pro-Grant people dislike Chernow for this. They'll accept other things that he's written about Grant because they're all good. But about the alcoholism, they don't like it. But Grant really was addicted. His family physician acknowledged that he was with him during the first couple of years of the war, and he said during the first couple of years of the war, Grant was addicted to alcohol. And there's many other episodes that sort of indicate that quite strongly. But I'm sorry to say that Chernow merely accepted the rest of the standard whitewashed version of Grant's life, and Chernow was not well grounded in the history of the American Civil War. There's one paragraph of his concerning the Battle of Chattanooga contained 4 distinct quotations, and Chernow somehow misdescribed each and every quote as to what it concerned. 3 of them, he was using quotes that concerned an event 2 days earlier, and one was a quote that concerned Sherman 2 miles to the left of where he was quoting, or what he was talking about. Even though the source was quite clear in each case, not really confusable, and one was a dated journal entry, and he used that to describe something that actually happened 2 days later, which is impossible. It was a journal entry on the 23rd, and he used it for the charge up Missionary Ridge on the 25th of November. So that's just bad scholarship, among other things.
Okay. Now, in your book, since you espouse skepticism of Grant's generalship during the Civil War, then in your opinion, who supplied the tactical and strategic wisdom under Grant's various commands throughout the war, in your opinion?
Well, that's very hard to say. It's a multifaceted issue. It can't be perfectly known in any, to any great degree. Also, Grant was quite lucky, which some people admit to, which makes it look like he was tactically proficient or strategically, wonderful, when it really things just happened to work out for the best, or the Confederate commander just turned out to be, a fool. They had fools on both sides. But John Aaron Rawlins was Grant's right-hand man throughout almost the entire war. He was his assistant adjutant general. He turned into his chief of staff. He later became Secretary of War under Grant. He was widely acknowledged as being indispensable to Grant. Now, Sherman, who served under Grant for a long time, he's overrated as a commander, in my opinion. But somebody like John McClernand has been unfairly demeaned, even though he served Grant well in quite a few battles. George Thomas, most famously, made Grant look great in the Chattanooga campaign, and Grant took credit for the Cracker Line opening, which was really Thomas's and other people's doing. But Grant minimized Thomas's efforts throughout this campaign. Joe Hooker's superior performance at Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge only elicited Grant's scorn in that campaign. Grant's memoirs have really done a disservice to history in the way people look at the Civil War, almost in toto. But
okay. In your opinion, was there a better way to fight Robert E. Lee when Grant led the Overland campaign? Were there any viable tactical alternatives instead of what Grant actually did in the Overland campaign?
Oh, absolutely. There were better alternatives. And throughout the war, Grant ordered his armies to attack all along the line. It happened at Vicksburg. Really, even Donaldson and Shiloh can be sort of examples of that. But then especially when you get to the Overland campaign, time and time again, he would just launch his troops into frontal assaults in the dense forest or against fortified lines with little time for preparation. He very often just sort of said, "I'm it's done tomorrow, attack tomorrow," and something that should take a week of planning to do. He showed very little interest in well-planned maneuvers, even when his opponent, Robert E. Lee, epitomized tactical acumen. And at that stage of the war, 1864, the Union had overpowering advantages, and the failure to effectively utilize them must be laid at Grant's feet, in my opinion.
Okay. Would you please discuss it? Now, you talk about Grant's cronyism in your book. Would you please discuss it? Who were his proteges, and who were those whose careers he demeaned or demolished?
Do we have all night?
Okay.
He really was, even Professor Simpson, one of his biggest offenders and most prolific one, notes that Grant was a hater and that he hated a lot of the people wearing the same uniform as himself. In short, William Sherman and Philip Sheridan basically could do no wrong. Even when they did wrong, Grant wouldn't acknowledge it. Sheridan could do foolish things in the Overland Campaign, such as with Grant's permission, taking his cavalry away from the army to fight his own little battle, leaving Meade's army sort of blind and stumbling into Spotsylvania and North Anna and Cold Harbor. William Sherman, who's responsible for a good portion of the surprise at Shiloh, you'll never learn that about from Grant. Grant will just give Sherman the highest accolades. Along with them, you've got Grenville Dodge, Oliver Otis Howard, John Logan, James McPherson, E.O.C. Ord, John Schofield. They were all well-treated proteges, both in the battle or campaign, in the field, and in history, in his memoirs.
Okay.
Grant could be magnanimous to his friends. He wrote glowingly of their deeds. And this is now basically accepted fact. On the other hand, he was vindictive. He disliked or actually hated people like William Rosecrans, especially William Rosecrans, Joe Hooker, John McClernand, and George Thomas, among many others. And they usually show up poorly in biographies and histories as a result of Grant's doings and writings, and especially the memoirs. And besides advancing his friends and holding back his enemies, Grant even determined the plans for battles and campaigns based upon his own personal feelings. And Chattanooga, again, is like one of the greatest examples of Grant. And in that case, he was trying to keep Hooker out of action. He didn't want Thomas to do really much. He put all of his focus on Sherman. Sherman blew his opportunity, just did a terrible battle, which some people still defend. And then, sending Thomas's troops forward just to take the pressure off Sherman, Thomas's men ended up winning this wonderful victory by ascending the ridge, which you weren't supposed to do. Grant basically said, well, that was my plan all along. Sherman said, yep, that was Grant's plan all along. I was just supposed to act as a decoy, and Thomas was supposed to win the battle, when it was just the opposite. It's just amazing how they twisted that whole thing around. So that's just one of the things I find just appalling when I read histories of that battle and of the war as a whole.
Okay. Joseph, let's talk about you now. Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was fortunate enough. I was brought up as a white male in an upper-middle-class household, a dentist father and a nurse mother, in a house full of books in Binghamton, New York, before it lost half of its population. And my father had numerous works on military history around the house, including the West Point Atlas of American Wars and Jane's Fighting Ships, 1938. And one of the first such books I remember reading was Ernle Bradford's The Great Siege about Malta.
Okay. Where did you go to school and later college?
Binghamton Central High School and the State University of New York at Albany. There I had like 50 credits out of 120 in my geography major. And I had enough for a history minor, but instead I cobbled together my own urban studies minor, because that was my love at that point. Still sort of is.
Okay. Joseph, whenever I interview an author, I always love to ask this standard question. Who were your favorite authors when you were growing up? And of those favorite authors, did any of them light the spark inside you to become a writer or perhaps influence your writing style?
That's a tough question. I really read mostly nonfiction. I'd like to catch up more on, the great fiction. my writing is very straightforward. People sometimes compliment, which surprises me, because I sort of know that it's sort of boring. It's not florid. It's not very funny. But every once in a while, I get the feeling to include a quote from like Gilbert and Sullivan about a bald and unconvincing narrative. But in general, I don't think I certainly haven't copied anybody's style, and my own style is just nothing special. Just get the facts forward, do it I probably don't cut Grant much slack in my writing, or any slack, but I try not to do anything that can be considered just incorrect. I hate making errors. I hate other people's errors, but I hate my own errors even more so. So I like to make sure, and then all the errors I found, I've put in a list of errata on my website, so you can see all the mistakes I've made, or many of the mistakes I've made. I still find new ones every now and then. But yes, history is too important to allow people to go around saying whatever they want just because it fits their little narrative. So I've tried to do better. I'll leave it up to my readers to determine whether I did or not.
Okay. Joseph, please tell our audience, where can readers find your book, Grant Under Fire? Where can they find it?
They can be purchased through Amazon. Just look under Grant Under Fire. That usually pops it up, but there's some novel Under Fire by that famous sort of military novelist who will pop up instead sometimes.
Yeah.
But also, even better would be if you bought the book through grantunderfire.com. I hope it works there. If not, send me an email. Okay. It's an easy way. I could also personalize the book that way if somebody wants it sullied by my name. The book has like 621 pages of tightly packed text. I hate waste, so it's very dense, both the writing of it and also the publishing of it. It's there's how many 100,000 words? Quite a few. There's like 37 maps, over 100 pages of endnotes. It's like not your usual offering that you'll find at a bookstore, like in the Civil War section.
Yeah. Okay. Joseph, what is your next book project, and when can we expect its release?
Well, unfortunately, I'm a procrastinator big time. Much of my time these days has been spent doing further research. I'd really like to nail down a couple more episodes. I've written one article in response to Dr. Brooks Simpson. He wrote about what happened on Orchard Knob, which is, did Grant really expect Thomas's troops to not just go to the base of Missionary Ridge, but did Grant really expect them to then ascend the ridge on his order and win the battle like they did? And of course the answer is no. There's so much information out there about how he didn't do that. So I wrote an article about what really happened on Orchard Knob. So there's another one you've got, not as important, but the drunken trip up the Yazoo River, which Grant took during the Vicksburg campaign. I think he was just like looking to get away from camp, looking for a release. And I've got it pretty well established that Sylvanus Cadwallader, a reporter who was in Grant's camp, loved Grant protege, Grant pet reporter, had taken Grant's boat up the river the day before, had looked around, came down, met Grant coming up on another boat up the Yazoo. Grant switched over to Cadwallader's boat. He was drunk by this time. He got more drunk, and he went up the river toward the Confederate lines, basically. And a lot of people say, oh, Cadwallader was just making this up out of whole cloth. I think was it Catton, one of them was saying that with a enemy like Cadwallader, Grant, with a friend like Cadwallader, Grant didn't need enemies. Now, basically, this was one of Grant's biggest friends, and Cadwallader's recollections basically only say nice things about Grant, except this one episode where he said Grant was drunk. But people don't want to hear that. And so I'm just looking for that last little bit of information that sort of locks it in that says, yes, Grant went up the river, he switched boats, he got drunk, met Cadwallader, could have gotten himself captured, went back downriver, sobered up, got drunk again the next day. And while this was happening, the Battle of Milliken's Bend was happening across the Mississippi, maybe 10 miles away. And raw black regiments that Grant had left there without artillery, there were one regiment was still being brought up, as a regiment, wasn't even formed yet, basically. They were attacked by the Confederates, pushed to the river, could have been slaughtered. Fortunately, they fought like hand-to-hand very courageously and forced the Confederates back. But while Grant was drunk, and they say, Grant was never drunk during battle, while Grant was drunk, this was happening, and Grant possibly could have done better if he'd been sober the day before, if he was, taking care of business, which he wasn't. Okay. And then there was one other episode of the Battle of Iuka that there's really not enough information to go on, where it looks like Grant was drunk at his headquarters when William Rosecrans was off fighting the enemy, and the General Ord on Grant's side of the battlefield, who should have been attacking and taking the focus off of Rosecrans, didn't do anything. And Grant sends in a flag of truce during that battle, which allowed the Confederates to say, okay, now we don't even have to worry about the people on Ord's front, because they're held up by a flag of truce, because you're not supposed to fight during a flag of truce, and they can focus all their effort on Rosecrans. So if Grant really was drunk at that battle, it seems like he was, that's just another unforgivable sin, one of many.
Okay. Joseph, I want to thank you for appearing on the show, and I wish you the best of luck on your future writing endeavors.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience, and good luck in your future endeavors. Thanks again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show, where I will be interviewing author Rosalind Hauser. Thank you and good night.